How many times have you seen Sudan in the news but chosen to look away, thinking it's just another African war? I know, news is draining, but did you know that 150,000 people have been killed? Over 12 million have fled their homes, and half of the population of Sudan is in severe need of humanitarian aid. That's right, maybe it's finally time we understand what exactly is going on there. Sudan is enormous. It's Africa's third largest country, sitting at the crossroads of Africa and the Middle East, bordering 7 fragile states and the Red Sea. Its fate touches the lives of hundreds of millions of people, and the conflict here is the result of a political system that imploded, an economy built on gold and corruption, and a world order that keeps looking away. In April 2023, fighting broke out in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, between the Sudanese armed forces and a powerful paramilitary called the Rapid Support Forces. What began as a political dispute between two generals has since then become a national catastrophe. Since then, the images coming out of Sudan keep getting worse. The latest are these satellite photos showing streets stained in dark, irregular patches and hospital compounds where rows of bodies seem to lie where patients once slept. Researchers at Yale say that these images are consistent with mass killings in El-Fasher, Darfur's main city. If that sounds familiar, it should. Darfur was once the scene of mass slaughter 20 years ago. The difference now is the scale, the speed, and the fact that whole populations are being wiped out in seconds. The International Criminal Court has said it is investigating whether the Rapid Support Forces may have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in El-Fasher. But let's step back. This isn't a story that starts with a single atrocity or a single day of fighting. It's a long, ugly arc, one that explains why the killings keep happening, why whole towns are starving, and why outside pressure keeps missing the mark. Sudan sits in the crossroads between North Africa and the Horn of Africa. It's huge, almost 2 million square kilometers, and it controls key river systems and borders. But geopolitical importance alone doesn't explain why anyone should care. The real reason to care is simple. This is one of the worst humanitarian disasters on the planet. The UN calls it the world's largest humanitarian crisis. So why isn't the world acting like it's a global emergency? There are 4 blunt reasons. The first being that the crisis is long and complicated and doesn't really fit into quick news cycles. Secondly, as we saw with the genocide in Gaza, mainstream Western media rarely cares for conflicts that don't affect them or aren't in their interests. If it wasn't for independent journalists, social media, or public pressure, we would barely even know what's going on in Gaza. And analysts say that it's the same story with Sudan as well. And then there is also the racial and geographic blindness in international politics. When catastrophe is remote and happens in African countries, response tends to be slower and less forceful. Even UN officials have warned about this. And finally, the war is funded by a shadow economy. Gold, smuggling, regional patrons. So influential states have incentives not to press too hard. And here's the short version of how we got here. Now, the civil war that consumes Sudan today officially began about 2 years ago. But the political fractures that made it possible date back much further. Long story short, after decades under Omar al-Bashir, massive protests in 2019 brought him down. A fragile power-sharing arrangement between the military and civilian groups followed. But in October 2021, the 2 generals who had been allies before took power in another coup. Those two men are General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, who leads the Sudanese Armed Forces or SAF, and General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who leads the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces or RSF. The immediate spark for the 2023 fighting was a falling out over the RSF's planned integration into the regular army. The question was who would lead the combined force and who would keep the wealth and privileges that they had accumulated. That fight for influence and for control of Sudan's resources turned violent when redeployments and mistrust broke into open warfare. From there, the conflict escalated across the country. Khartoum fell into urban combat, supply lines were cut, farms and markets shut down, and combatants, some with roots in old militias, began committing crimes against civilians that echo Darfur's worst days. Now, let's talk about who's fighting whom. The Sudanese Armed Forces are Sudan's official military. It's a vast bureaucracy of officers, businesses, and intelligence agencies that has ruled the country for decades. Its commander, General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, leads what is left of the state: fighter jets, aging tanks, and an economy run through military-owned companies. The SAF's power is institutional. It owns banks, factories, and construction firms. Its generals sit at the center of Sudan's patronage system, intertwined with political Islamists and old elites from the Nile corridor. Burhan's priority is to preserve that system. Supported by Egypt and also increasingly Iran, the SAF presents itself to the world as the legitimate government. Then there's the RSF, a militia that became a business empire. The Rapid Support Forces began as the Janjaweed, Arab militias used by former dictator Omar al-Bashir to crush rebellion in Darfur in the 2000s. In 2013, they were formalized under a young commander, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemeti. He built the RSF into a private army of roughly 100,000 fighters, ruthless and self-financed. His family company, Al-Junaid Group, controls gold mines in Darfur and Kordofan. The RSF also fought as mercenaries in Yemen and Libya. The RSF's message is populist, that it represents the marginalized peripheries against Khartoum's old elite. In practice, it's a paramilitary corporation fighting for autonomy and profit. Backed by different networks and illicit gold trade, it now rivals the army in wealth and power. Basically, the SAF wants to stay in power of the state, and the RSF wants to replace it. Their war is a struggle between an entrenched army and an ambitious militia, each convinced that it can outlast the other. Now, let's talk about what just happened in El-Fasher and why Sudan is resurfacing in new cycles. El-Fasher was the last major SAF stronghold in Darfur. After an 18-month siege, the RSF captured the city in October. Survivors describe house-to-house killings, mass executions on hospital grounds, and the looting and destruction of displacement camps and markets. Thousands fled and many still remain trapped. Yale researchers and humanitarian groups say that these are not the messy byproducts of battle. They are evidence of systematic, deliberate massacres. After the takeover, graphic footage circulated of RSF fighters bragging about killings and of a fighter known as Abu Lulu live streaming murders. Footage that spurred outrage and then a limited RSF claim of arrests that many activists called a PR stunt. The social media evidence, the satellite photos, and ground testimony together create a troubling case. The ICC has also responded. Prosecutors say that they are collecting and preserving evidence and that the acts reported in El-Fasher may constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. That doesn't really mean quick justice because ICC investigations do take time, but it does mean that the allegations have reached the level where international law actors are mobilizing. Now, here's the real deal. Wars cost money. When formal revenue streams dry up, combatants turn to whatever is left: looting, taxation of civilians, smuggling, and in Sudan, it's gold. Sudan is a major gold producer. The RSF seized refineries, currency printing houses, and mining districts early in the war. Reports show that gold from RSF-controlled sites moved through regional smuggling routes and ended up in Gulf markets. A UN panel estimated tens of tons of gold were extracted from RSF areas in 2024 and generated hundreds of millions of dollars. Figures are disputed, but the pattern is clear. The SAF likewise taxes gold from its own territories. Control of mines finances fighters, logistics, and influence, which makes a negotiated settlement harder. Both sides profit from the fighting. That's why outside leverage is limited. Because if foreign buyers, intermediaries, or permissive ports accept stolen or smuggled gold, the war is effectively bankrolled. Until those flows are cut, incentives to stop fighting remain weak. Sudan is now the world's largest displacement crisis. Over 12 million are internally displaced, 4 million more have fled abroad, and half of these are children. Camps are overcrowded, underfed, and often bombed. Famine is already confirmed in El-Fasher and Katugli. According to UN estimates, 21 million Sudanese face acute food insecurity. Cholera and measles are surging, and hospitals have no supplies. UNICEF calls it a catastrophe for an entire generation. The Economist warns that the war in Sudan could kill millions and spread chaos across Africa and the Middle East. Africa's third largest country is ablaze. Khartoum is rubble, bodies are buried in parking lots, satellite data shows entire farming regions on fire. And if famine continues, as many as 10 million people could die by 2027. But the danger doesn't stop at Sudan's borders. The Red Sea is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, and Sudan controls 800 kilometers of it. If the war destabilizes the coast, it threatens the Suez Canal, through which a seventh of global trade passes. Essentially, Sudan has become a proxy marketplace, a war funded by drones, gold, and oil interests, with no ideology beyond profit. And the fallout is already global. Sudanese refugees now make up 60% of the migrants in Calais camps trying to reach Europe. The Economist calls it a geopolitical time bomb. If Sudan collapses completely, it could trigger new refugee crises, new terror havens, and a new wave of instability stretching from the Horn of Africa to the Mediterranean. Sudan's implosion has 5 major global consequences. First is trade and the Red Sea choke point. The war threatens one of the world's busiest maritime arteries. With Houthi attacks already disrupting Red Sea traffic, chaos on the western shore could force cargo ships to bypass the Suez and sail around Africa, raising global freight costs and inflation. Then, great power competition. Russia and Iran see Sudan as a potential naval foothold on the Red Sea. Gulf monarchies view it as a sphere of influence. If Port Sudan hosts foreign warships, it could shift naval balances and complicate Western and African security cooperation. Then, transnational crime and gold smuggling. Sudan's war economy feeds global black markets. Gold, weapons, people. Cracking down on them requires financial transparency and cooperation from states that currently profit. Then, regional destabilization and migration. Neighboring countries like Chad, South Sudan, and Egypt are absorbing millions of refugees. Europe will also see increased migration pressure, feeding political backlash that could reshape domestic politics. Then there's the security spillover. Sudan's collapse opens up room for extremist groups and mercenary networks, bridging the Sahel and the Horn. That means new safe havens, weapons flows, and a harder fight for regional counterterrorism. In short, the war isn't local, it's systemic. Every boat of refugees on the Nile, every drone strike in Port Sudan sends ripples outwards, reshaping trade, migration, and security across continents. Since April 2023, there have been numerous ceasefire efforts, talks in Jeddah, Geneva, and other venues. Repeated humanitarian pauses proposed during Ramzan, regional mediation attempts, yet none have held for long. Both sides use ceasefires tactically to regroup, resupply, and reposition, and neither has shown the political will to commit to a durable transition to civilian rule. The latest attempt for a ceasefire came on 6 November 2025 when the RSF said that it accepted a humanitarian truce proposed by a group of mediators, including the US, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. The SAF did not immediately reciprocate. History suggests that this kind of announcement is fragile. Ceasefires without monitoring, enforcement, or the buy-in of rank-and-file commanders collapse. Diplomacy is further complicated by external patrons. Accusations of arms and financial support, especially allegations about the UAE's ties to RSF gold channels and logistics, create geopolitical fault lines that blunt pressure. Now, what's going on here has been called a genocide, and words like genocide are supposed to have legal weight and political power, but as we saw in Gaza, even the UN acknowledging a genocide rarely makes a difference. The distinction matters legally, but the urgency on the ground is the same. People are being murdered and forced from their homes as collateral damage in the power struggle between two groups. So, what would meaningful action look like? There are no easy fixes to this war, given the scale of money, gold, and foreign power tangled in it. But even when the politics feels unmovable, the most important action is to protect humanitarian access, and that means insisting on safe corridors into besieged towns like El-Fasher and Kadugli with impartial monitors and rapid aid convoys. Agencies warn that this is the difference between famine and survival. Along with pushing for legal accountability and sustained political pressure, it's also important to amplify Sudanese voices who are the real witnesses to the atrocities going on there and can tell us what kind of help is needed. Now, there's a moral lesson here, and it's an old one. Ignoring patterns of mass violence makes future atrocities likelier. The Darfur campaign of the 2000s taught us that impunity breeds repetition. Now we're seeing that pattern repeat. We live in a world where satellite imagery, social media footage, and open source forensics can expose crimes in real time. That should certainly make it harder to look away. Yet exposure doesn't equal response. It's easy, with so many crises like Gaza, Congo, Sudan, to feel powerless, to scroll past another tragedy and think, what can I possibly do? But if the past 2 years have taught us anything, it's this. The worst thing we can do is look away. Change begins with attention. Outrage, when sustained, becomes pressure. Pressure, when organized, becomes policy, and policy saves lives. The people of Sudan are not asking the world for miracles. They're just asking to be seen, to have their pain recognized, their children protected, and their humanity acknowledged. So maybe the question isn't why we ignored Sudan, but how we choose to see it now. Because if we can do anything, we can at least make sure the children survive this.